Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of The Moonello Show.
That's the name of our show.
I am Matt.
I'm Jason.
Hope everyone's having a good time today. We are going to be talking about the software development lifecycle and what goes into getting software from just an idea to sitting on a server and doing everything you want it to do.
It's kind of important for software to be doing things that you want it to do.
And it does go through stages.
Yeah, and it doesn't just like happen out of nowhere. Like there's steps and time and processes.
Yep.
Yeah.
We'll get into them. There's a lot of good stuff packed into this episode. But if you're wondering what the software development lifecycle is, it's a structured process consisting of small iterative phases that get you from point A to point B. It's what guides the development through deployment, it's what guides the software through development and deployment onto maintenance and optimizations.
Optimizations, not maintenance.
No.
Yeah.
No, we talked about that in a previous episode too, about maintaining your software, which is actually one of the phases that we'll get into. But you'll see why it's known as optimizations and why things go from maintenance to optimizations as we move forward. So there are stages to the software development lifecycle that we'll get into. Just talking about what those stages are. So they are discovery, which is really your planning and your requirement gathering. So there's planning, and then we talk about design, which is the UI, UX, as well as the software architecture, all the data flows, everything that's going to be involved when it comes to which frameworks are we going to use, which testing tools are we going to use. Like everyone thinks that design is really only when the creative team is really pumping on the work that they need to do, but the development team is also working on some preemptive things, setting some things up, adding more to some user stories.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting because you don't know how you're going to develop it until you've got that plan settled down. That's certainly not something you could probably hit in discovery. That's like after you've defined requirements, how are we going to execute those requirements and then executing the requirements. So like you said, while the creative team is like thinking all the pretty stuff and the UX and stuff like that, the development team is going through and how are we going to do this part of it with technology? Or are we going to use? Where are we going to deploy it to? Platforms, that sort of thing.
Yep. So that's design, and then you get into implementation, which is sometimes known as coding, and then you move on from coding into testing. So testing, some of that does happen during coding. So as developers are actually coding and doing what they need to do in the coding phase, there's also unit testing that's going on, some type of testing that they're doing to test that their local code is suffice to the requirements, functional requirements. Sometimes other things we're testing too as well from a development standpoint. But the whole software itself or pieces of the software move on from coding to testing, and it really does move over to a whole nother department or discipline or a group of people known as QA, who are quality assurance, who are testing the software that was built. And then from testing goes on to deployment. So from deployment, you would think, oh, it's just pushing a button and like putting it on a server.
No.
But no, there's a reason why it's its own stage and its own phase of the software development lifecycle.
Deployment's like recovering after the battle or the war. It's like you're cleaning up the pieces and like realizing this didn't go, like it went fine, but maybe it didn't go as good as it needed to. And we need to like fix the things that our users are now finding. Because this is the stage when like users come into play at this point. And I think I've said this before, no one's going to find bugs or bad things in your code like actual using it everyday people. So
But in deployment, we're testing APIs. We're making sure all the connections are as good and as tied to each other as they were during like a UAT or like a stage deployment that we have pushed somewhere. We're making sure that the site's accessible. We're making sure people can get to it. We're making sure that it's being accessed in the way it's meant to be. If it was like an intranet site that's only internal, we're testing from different locations, potentially of the world. Hey, can people access this, outside of a particular country or within a particular country, not just publicly accessible to the whole world? So
is www working?
Yeah. Is www working? Is it not working?
Right. Because I mean, this isn't like a very readily apparent thing, but like there's a difference. Like there's a way that routing happens with and without it, and
Yep.
we've learned, not we've known this, but like we've been dealing with this recently on a couple of client projects where like there's a difference between accessing a site with Moonello.com versus www.moonello.com.
Yep.
So that's all part of that.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, www exists as a subdomain,
right?
And people just automatically think that that's the root or the web address, but no, the apex domain is moonello.com or whatever.
Yeah, it's strange that like we haven't gotten to the point where we've built those in already. Like just assumed that www should do this. I wonder if there's circumstances where it shouldn't, or if it's not supposed to be the default.
Yeah,
that's interesting. I want to look that up.
Yeah,
I want to figure that out.
I think other companies have different, app dot, site dot, or
maybe you would
intranet
want
dot
yoursite.com to route specifically to app.yoursite.com instead of www being the default. But I don't know. That's weird.
Yep. So once we move on from deployment, which deployment could take, depending on the complexities, could take a day, could take a week, depending on what's in the roadmap, all the different things to test for, to validate. And then we move on to maintenance, or like we call optimizations, where we're keeping an eye on things, making sure, again, that things are connected, that, users that are using the site or the application are using it in a way that it was intended to. If there's any type of e-commerce flows, that those flows aren't broken, or if they need to be enhanced in some way, that we're listening to customers as they're using it.
Yeah. Fixing the bugs and making sure that all the reported button colors that are wrong are fixed, and just, I don't know. This is also the time where you're going to first see like the load of your site, like how much traffic you're getting, and can the calls that your front end is making be handled by the back end that you're using, or do you have to do some sort of an efficiency improvement to make that be able to handle the traffic that you're working with?
Yeah, and maybe you've stress tested your app in a simulated way, but now that it's actually out there in the world and actually being used.
Yeah, different users using different internet speeds, different devices with different processing powers. Yeah, there's a lot more kind of variability that a pure testing phase probably can't fully simulate.
Right.
Or maybe it can, and we just need to do it better.
Yeah. So that's the phase. So we go from discovery to design to development to testing to maintenance. Sometimes discovery might be broken up into two different phases called planning and then gathering requirements or requirements gathering, because sometimes there's, in the planning phase, it's realized that there's no reason to move forward, so why go into requirement gathering? So that's why sometimes those are split up into two different phases, but the majority of the time they're put together into one called discovery.
Or your entire app idea could change in that first planning phase. Like if you did the reverse, or you did them at the same time, then a lot of that requirements work that you had done just gets tossed out the window, and it's then they're all jumbled together too. So you need to go back and figure out what requirements still need to stay and what aren't needed anymore. So that can get confusing. So keep them separate.
Yep. So we'll go into a little bit of detail as we go through here. Really, the primary goal is to ensure the efficient and effective creation of high quality software across the business. Then it meets the business objectives, and then it also meets user requirements. So the stakeholders that have created the whole reasoning behind why we want to build this software, why we want to launch this website, why we want to build this mobile app, is that it's tied to business objectives. And the whole software development lifecycle is created to make sure that the whole process meets those business objectives, and that it meets the needs of the users on the other end that will be using this. And users could be the general public. Users could be employees at a company.
Yeah.
Users could be
yourself.
Could be anybody. And the whole idea is to really understand the user base and to really understand what problem that it's solving and what potentially it's doing. It maybe it's not solving a problem, but maybe it's streamlining some processes that might be redundant,
which is certainly solving a problem.
Absolutely, yep.
Yeah.
So if we, as we go through things, there's significance that goes into the software development life cycle as it aligns to modern business landscape. So, alignment with business goals, which is what we mentioned before, improved quality and reliability. Again, we talked about this during our podcast episode on maintenance and optimizations, right? You want to make sure that you're really looking into things as your software is out there living to make sure that it's available. If it's down and you're not monitoring, you don't realize it. Oh, wow, we haven't had any new signups in the last week. That's a problem. Or, wow, our page visits went from 1,000 a day or 20,000 a day down to nothing. I think there's a problem.
Yeah, or people are leaving at this part of the site and we don't know why. If you're not paying attention to that thing, right? Drop-offs at a certain page are making people just lose interest or not having the internet thing. They get to the form, then they don't do anything with the form.
Right. Faster time to market, right? So if you're following a plan and your plan is a really good plan, and you put time against all the different features that need to go into the software, and the team's following the plan, faster time to market. At the same time, when you're following the software development lifecycle, we'll get into a couple of the Agile methodologies, is that you're pushing out not necessarily content, but you're pushing out features quicker, in a more iterative way. So it gives you, checks the box on faster time to market, especially if you're in a business that needs to stay ahead of the curve, or your competition is a little agile too. So you want to get out there faster than them if you can.
Yeah, it doesn't that improve the time to minimal viable product. Like you can get to a point where you can release something that maybe it isn't everything you want your app to be, but because you've been doing it in a very strategic way, you can get the minimal thing out there, and then the other stuff can just be built onto it after the fact.
Yep. Yeah, through the minimum viable product. Yeah, and it's good to push something out and not bolt everything on in the very beginning. And then you put that thing out there, because then people might start to use it, or users might begin to use it in a way that, well, it makes these other features that we didn't implement yet unnecessary.
Yeah.
So thank God we didn't spend all that time and money on implementing them, because our users wouldn't even have wanted them or used them. And now you're realizing, oh, instead of those other features, there's these 3 other things that they're asking for that we never even thought of, right? So yeah, certainly. And then enhanced collaboration and communication. So the whole software development life cycle just breathes collaboration and communication throughout the entire cycle.
Last episode we talked about, that was the entire last episode. So what was that, episode 7?
Yep.
Go listen to episode 7 about more about that, but not now. Keep listening to this one.
Yep.
Then after this one, go back to 7.
Yep.
Even if you've listened to it.
Effective communication. Even if you listen to it, listen to it again.
Listen to it, go back and listen to it again.
Awesome. So if you're thinking about how can the software development lifecycle help my business grow, we talked about redundant, killing redundant tasks. It's all about, increased efficiency. That rings a bell.
That's huge. Yep. Because the less efficient your business is, or your business practices is, the more money you're just throwing into the trash on time and resources and commitments and that sort of thing. So
absolutely,
the better you can get your software through the software cycle, the better it's going to be for everybody involved.
Yep.
Especially the people making decisions with lots of money in their pockets.
Right. And then competitive advantage, right? So we talked about that, right? Stakeholders might develop a need for software, and they might say, hey, we need this in 3 months or 4 months, and that might be tied to some business objective or some type of rollout of a new product that they're rolling out with. It could be tied to the whole competitive advantage.
Yeah, think of the advantage that ChatGPT has right now over Google Bard, just because they've been out for 3 or 4 months sooner than that. people are still talking about Google Bard, but not anywhere near what they are with GPT and the possibilities of that. And like Google could right now make any like the coolest advantage or the coolest enhancement to their service that they want, but they've still already lost ground because they weren't out when or before GPT was.
Right. Yeah, and the whole and how Microsoft has entered that game with OpenAI, right? And how those two, Google and Microsoft have always butt heads around search, right? And Bing has never been able to get to the point of, right, even close to Bing, but now with the the collaboration with chat.
Now Microsoft is offering something that Google doesn't offer right now for the first time in a very long time. Like Microsoft has something on Google, and that's kind of big, and that's because they have competitive advantage because they got their software out first. Right. So
and agility and adaptability, right? So if you're pushing out features in a more time bound way, or if you're just focused on pushing out features quickly, right? Instead of waiting 18 months to push this entire giant piece of software out, right? Unless it's brand new, right? But if you already have a software platform out and you're making feature releases to it, that just allows you to be agile, allows you to be adaptable to what your customers are saying about it, to how they're using the software. You're fixing bugs quicker, you're getting the nuances out of it faster, you're making API calls quicker. So
I really like when software comes out with very quick feature releases, like you get one after the other almost, right? And that doesn't happen in a wait until the entire second version of your app is completed. That happens when you can release a feature after a sprint. Like we're working on 5 features right now, but we don't need to wait until all 5 of those features are complete. We can release feature number 1 right now because it's done, because we've been following this Agile methodology that's led us to be able to do that.
Right. And believe it or not, all of this does lead to enhanced customer satisfaction, right? So when you're releasing things over a period of time, I know with the software tools that we use, any no-code or low-code tools that we use that often push out updates, right? Oh, this is cool. Okay, great. Wow, this is great. And they just push things, they don't wait, like you said, to version 3 that's releasing in 2027 to roll out their changes, or else they would just be left behind. Someone else would just come through and build the same exact product, add that feature in there, and then offer it to the masses, right?
And certainly, I mean, I can't think of any examples, but that's had to have happened before.
Yep.
And be very common.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure. So we're gonna get into a little bit of the different stages and what they mean. We kind of riffed on them earlier, but I mean, we can go into a little bit more detail on the different stages. Where the first one, starting with planning and analysis, which we kind of combine into one thing called discovery, which discovery can really be its own thing because it is legitimately the most important stage of the entire cycle itself.
Right. I mean, this is where like the objectives of the project and the requirements are all identified. The stakeholders gather to kind of talk about all of that and figure out what the entire kind of scope of the project is going to be altogether. Like, what's the application going to do? It's when like, I think we've talked about this before, but like figuring out if the application is even like a feasible product. Is it going to work the way you intend it to work? Is there a market for it? Is there something out there that's already doing it in the way that like has already cornered that market, so there's no room for you to get into there, and all of that needs to be figured out before you start committing, design and development resources to it. And then obviously there's personas that we need to figure out. Figure out the users and what do they look like? What are they going to be doing? What do they need? How do we think they're going to use it? Are they going to use it in the way that we think that they're going to use it? And if not, how do we anticipate that? So that's like
what's our plan and process for when? Yep, exactly.
Yeah, and how do we handle it? Like once we find the information, what are we going to do with that information?
Right. Yeah, and then part of the planning too is building a roadmap. Right? For how are we what's block 1? What's step 1? What are we doing on day 1? What's going to be in sprint 1? How many sprints are we going to have? What are all the different features? What's the priority of these features, right? From the stakeholders, which feature is more important than the other feature? right? And of those requirements, which requirements are going to take the longest, right? So which need design, which just need software, which just are already done but need testing.
Mm-hmm.
So building a roadmap too is extremely important. That's the whole planning part, and then the analysis part is a lot what Jason said about developing user personas, feasibility studies, requirements, and all that.
Yeah, and then there's the whole like actually figuring out who's in charge of what and who makes the decisions on what.
Roles and
like,
responsibilities.
Yeah. Because I mean, obviously, like in most organizations, you've got a structure of he's the manager of she, who's the manager of them, who's the manager of whoever, and like that's the chain of command. But like at the top, who decides whether we're going to go with iteration A or iteration B if there's a split or if there's some decision that needs to be made, and there needs to be people in charge of who's going to make those decisions. Unless it's, I mean, I imagine that maybe it becomes a democracy at some point, but that gets a little crazy.
Thankfully, there are roles and responsibilities to the software development lifecycle. There's product owners, scrum masters, development teams. There's stakeholders. Everyone's involved. Everyone is involved. We learned that before.
That was big from last episode.
Yeah,
which is
involved.
One that you should go back and listen to.
Yeah, after this one though, right?
Not right now. That's the thing. We'll say it again.
Yep.
After you're done listening to whatever it is we're doing right now.
Yep. The whole planning and analysis stage, discovery phase is huge when it comes to effective communication. That's where everybody kind of, pauses on completing work. That's where everyone kind of is involved in developing the plan. That's where PI planning takes place.
Right.
That's where all the roadmap is developed. That's where what we like to call the magic happens.
Nice.
So then once we leave there, feasibility, projects a go. This is going to be great. Everyone's on board. This is wonderful. We're going to change the world. We jump right into design. This is design from a standpoint of UI, user interface. This is design in an aspect of UX, user experience. This is design in a way of software architecture, design in a way of the QA team themselves are building test scripts on how they're going to be testing the software. All of this is happening in the design phase. Design isn't just the look and feel. So
you wouldn't think that just by the name or what the typical person would understand as design. That's a lot of work, and I guess it kind of makes sense. Like, what are all those other teams doing while the designers are doing their thing? There's
the poor creative team
just while the creative team is like
stressing out, doing all their work, and they do. Yeah, I mean, they do a tremendous amount of work during the whole entire process of the thing. Even during their and even so, like, it's important to note that it isn't that we leave one stage and then go to the next stage and then go to the next stage and go to the next stage. This is happening for all the different features that get put into sprints.
Right. So it's like a circle for every individual thing that's going through a cycle, life cycle.
So it's not like the entire look and feel and experience is built and then it's all kind of just like handed over to like the software development team and the QA team for testing. It's, hey, in sprint 1 we have to create this this checkout form that's going to accept a credit card or PayPal or you name it, some type of payment structure, or Klarna, pay now, pay later, right? That gets, when that sprint happens, whether it's month 2, week 3, wherever it happens in the roadmap, the design or creative team gets involved to design it, build the user experience around it. Now there's probably some work that has been done up the chain in the roadmap to develop, okay, what is the functionality of this? Which credit card companies are we going to accept? What API are we going to connect to when it comes to charging the card, right? All of that is kind of figured out up the chain in the roadmap in some other user story in the roadmap. So when it comes time to actually execute on building it, we have all the necessary design, has all the necessary ins and outs that they need to know. Development team has all the necessary ins and outs that they need. So it gets designed, it gets developed, and we're just ready to go with that. So it's not like we're designing the whole thing and then handing it over to the next group.
That sounds very waterfall-y. Yeah.
How they did it
with punch cards.
1873. I don't know.
1873. When Alan Turing. I don't know if 1873 is anywhere related to that, but Alan Turing is a buzzword, so
yep,
a buzz person.
Yep. So that's design, and then like we mentioned earlier, so we move on from design to sometimes it's known as implementation because we're actually implementing everything that's been planned and analyzed and designed. And now it's time to implement. But really, that's where we're writing application code. That's where we're building
the development part.
That's where the development part is actually happening.
Yeah, that's the fun part.
Yep.
That's where I go clicky click on the keyboard.
Yep. And certainly during this phase is where software developers are they're looking at artifacts, they're looking at designs in Figma, they're looking at sketch files, they're analyzing things. By now, they should probably have had all of their questions answered.
Yeah.
By now, they've understood what the requirements are. Everything is in the user story. Everything's written out for them in their task, whether their task is in Asana or Jira, depending on where they're working.
Yeah. And it's the initial step of testing as well, because we kind of alluded to that at the beginning, but you test your code, but obviously you can run unit tests to test your code, and that isn't necessarily a separate step than that. That's part of, or should be part of, the implementation part before it goes on to QA testing or any more advanced things.
Correct. Yep. Yeah. Unit test cases are usually written first before the actual development, before the actual application code gets written. But yeah, this is the implementation, which could potentially take the longest in a way, only because it's where code actually begins to hit the screen. Yeah. Right. And during this process is when developers are collaborating with design, and they're saying, hey, here's a demo. Did I interpret the requirements correctly? Is this how you wanted it to look? Oh, what about this? I ran into this. Did you guys think of this? Oh, we didn't. Okay, let's go talk to our product owners, see how we want to handle this.
Certainly, demoing is a very important part of that part of the cycle.
Yep. So there's certainly collaboration that happens during this process. So yeah, that's implementation. That's basically the third stage or the third phase of the process, depending on how you want to split things up. Sometimes, like we mentioned before, the discovery phase gets split up sometimes arbitrarily into different groups, depending on the complexities and any feasibility stories that need to be written. But once we leave implementation, right, it turns over to a group of folks or a team of QA, quality assurance. These are associates that are trained in testing software. They have their own tools. Sometimes they are part of the project. Sometimes they're not, and sometimes that's a good thing if they're not.
Interesting. So they're just hey, test this thing. They get a random request from a random team, and they they're coming in fresh and new. They haven't been really there at the beginning of all the planning and stuff. So they're almost your first. Kind of seems like they're your first set of customers almost, but they're specifically trained to seek out and find and destroy the bad things that are happening in the code. Right. That's interesting.
They'll bring an unbiased. It doesn't happen all the time, but that does happen, and it does depend on the application. Sometimes there's a software application that's just massive, and it's just been built upon for years and years and years. And sometimes you just have people on the project that just know the software, but sometimes it's good to have whoever is responsible, or the group of people that's responsible for testing it, not really be too intertwined with what's going on, but they are aware of requirements. They have access to all the artifacts. They understand the user story. They understand exactly what this feature is supposed to accomplish. They understand all the requirements and the designs, and then they just go to town. Sometimes they might write their own automated test scripts. Sometimes they'll test it right with their mouse and keyboard. But that's where functional testing comes aboard. That's where user testing comes aboard. We're no longer testing if automated scripts are running to test if a button gets clicked, it sends someone to a contact page. Now we're actually testing, open the browser, go to www. Does the web address open? Great. If so, run this next set of code. Go find this button on the web page. Great, you found the button. Is it there? Great. Does it have the text? Contact. Great. All right, we're good. We're pass. Okay, click the button. Did it now navigate me to the contact page? Great. Did that web page load? Great. bam, pass. That's there's nothing like that type of testing.
It's really interesting. When I first like started researching doing development as a career choice, like way back in the day, like
1873.
years ago, like me and Alan Turing were sitting there at a coffee table, like, wonder if I should become a software developer, that stuff that isn't developed yet. Anyway, so like I would read forums and talk to people. There were tablets. You're right. There were. I would read forums and stuff and like get people's perspectives, and all the people said, like, when you first start, you're going to be put on a QA team, and you're not even going to be like developing software. You're like, the first thing you have to do, like the first big part of your career is going to be spent just like going through other people's codes and finding problems with it. And I remember like it was like a slight disheartening turnoff almost, because they really like put it in a perspective where it was like a bad thing for that to happen. But like in recent years, just like going through other people's code and like other people's on our team that have developed like back-end stuff, like server stuff, like going through there and inspecting the code has really helped me learn a whole lot about like how to code and what to look for and what to do in different like patterns and processes and stuff. So it's interesting that part of the, I'm going here with somewhere with this, don't worry. It's interesting that part of the software development cycle is not only like making the developer a better developer who will then or could go on to other places and actually start writing like the primary code and stuff like that, but it also like makes the whole project better. Like if you don't have that person doing that thing dedicated to pushing those buttons, like you're not always going to find the problems that will plague you when real customers start using it. So.
Right. Oh yeah. I mean, my first, my career as a mechanical engineer, like I was, thinking I was going to sit at a desk all day long and design and develop parts for cars.
Sit and CAD all day.
Yeah, and just sit and CAD all day and just enjoy the easy life, and then quickly learn that no, you're going to be out in the prototype lab, hands-on parts. You're going to be running tests and prototypes, and it was like, why? And
it's
then,
probably grunt work before you get to the cushy desk.
You learn why. You learn why. Oh, you can literally see this part is not, it's rubbing against another part, and you realize there's just nuances that you're going to learn with grease on your hands out in the prototype lab, that when you do actually make it to the cushy job of sitting in front of the CAD software, you're thinking of those things like, oh yeah, remember the tolerances are important. I got to make sure I factor those in. So, when I switched careers into what I do today, I mean, my first task at my first job was cranking through a queue of bugs, right? And it's one way to really learn about the whole entire code base as you're cranking through a whole queue full of bugs. All these bugs are spread across all the different aspects of the software. You learn where the back end is, you learn where the front end is, you learn where all the the global components are, you learn where the footer and the header are, you learn where the side navigation is. Like, you just begin to understand the full aspect of what this thing is.
Yeah, you almost become kind of like smarter as far as the code base is concerned. Like, you never intended to, but when you go through all those bugs, you become like the expert or an expert on the project, instead of just someone who can like superhero ninja code develop their way through a feature. You're like, hey, I know the answer to that problem because I saw it in a bug the other day. We can probably do this to fix it.
Yeah, imagine your value to the team now.
Yeah.
Instead, if you were brought in and said, hey, go rebuild the header, and you just kind of open up and you just start coding a new header, and then you're done and you go to demo it to the team, and they're like, all right, how are we gonna plug this into our application now? And you're gonna be like, I don't know.
I wasn't asked.
How was the rest of the application built? And they're gonna be like, oh, it's built in Next, and oh well, this is React, so it should work, right?
And then junior dev Jim comes over and is like, actually, this is the way that it should be, and no one listens to them, and he fails. So
right. And then so that's maintenance, right? A little bit of that, testing, and then we go into deployment. And I think we talked about before where deployment is more than just deployment.
Yeah, you push the buttons to make it go live, but then there's a lot of like, did it go live?
Yep.
Is it good in all the places? Are our servers handling the load? Is the web page, are all the pages in the web page opening for everybody across the world or the region or whoever's supposed to access it? Are the password protected things actually password protecting the things?
Yep.
You know,
or have we successfully turned them off?
Yes. The customers are asking what the password is to enter our website.
Gee, I don't know. Was there ever a password?
Seems like maybe there shouldn't be a password to go to the index page of our site.
Weird.
Get Jim. Let's see if Jim can fix
Jim
this.
on it. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that's obviously like a huge.
Yeah.
Like the first couple of days after, well, first couple of hours specifically, but then like the days after that is just like, what's going wrong? How do we fix it? Let's
especially
figure it out.
Especially if it's publicly accessible, right?
Yeah.
Because you need to hook up Google Search Console.
Oh,
you need to hook up Google Tag Manager, right? Obviously, those have already been hooked up, but are they firing correctly? Yeah. Are all the tags working as expected? If you have any, marketing attribution pixels running, you got to make sure those are firing and accepting stuff perfectly.
And especially if you are, if you're launching a public product, like obviously you've probably put some marketing into this before it's launched. So like there's a buzz that's already generated, and if your site isn't working when the buzz is supposed to be realized, like you're getting the traffic from that initial like, we're launching grand opening type of thing, and your product is just like failing, like all of that resource you've put into that pre-buzz effect is just down the drain.
Right.
And gone.
And there can be hiccups. There could be,
expect them.
We forgot to turn this switch on, right? Like there's certain, but the whole point of why deployment and launch is its own stage is because there's so many things, and you don't want to tuck it into implementation or tuck it into maintenance, because it is its own thing, and there's a reason why it is its own thing. It needs to be treated and respected as its own thing because of what it is.
Right.
So, yep. So then we move on to maintenance, the last phase, the last stage of the process, which maintenance isn't like it is kind of like maintaining your car, but man, no one likes to maintain their car, right? Or your refrigerator, or your furnace filter at home.
Think more like professional racers in their cars, though. Like obviously they want to do more than just make sure that the windshield wipers go right. They want to make sure that their turn radius is perfect every single time. They need to make sure that their fuel efficiency is the same. Their tires are maintained, like they have fresh and new ones every time they go around the track. So it's not like you're just making the car run. You want to make the car run as efficiently as possible, so it completes its task as efficiently as possible.
And what is attached to all those race cars? A lot of monitoring.
Yeah. A lot of sensors that are very expensive.
Yep.
A lot of people looking at those sensors and the data and the
lot of formulas attached to those sensors, right? So monitoring is huge. Bug fixing during this phase, of course, running updates and pushing out other features, right?
Yeah.
Just because you spent 4 months or whatever building the software application and then you deploy it, it doesn't mean that the next feature needs to take 4 months. It can take 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks, and 4 weeks, and then 2 weeks, and then 4 weeks, whatever.
And people like that.
People
like
love
I had
that.
mentioned at the beginning.
Absolutely. People almost expect it now.
Yeah.
I mean, when you sign up for a software product and you start using it, or a no-code tool, and you start using it, and they got like this "What's New" tab inside the software when you log in, and you click on it, and it's
the same thing that's been there for 10 months.
For 10 months, it's like, well, why is there nothing new here? How is there not anything new here? Haven't you heard of ChatGPT?
Yeah. Lately, I've been really like Notion has been doing that for me pretty well. Like, I follow them on LinkedIn, or I like them, whatever you do on LinkedIn, and like every time I see their picture, I'm like, ooh, did Notion come out with some new thing that I'm some new toy? Like the most recent, I don't know if it's the recent one, but the whole button thing that they came out with, awesome. You can make buttons that do different kind of like workflows almost, so it like really streamlines things. I love it when big features come out and then another new feature comes out like a month after that.
Got it.
Notion, when's the next big feature come out?
Those are fun. Jason would like to know.
Yeah.
We'll let Jim know too.
Yeah, Jim wants to know. I want to
know. Just making sure, during this phase, we're making sure that the software remains relevant, right? That's a big deal, that it remains reliable and it's secure as users, it's secure as users need it to be, and secure as in, how effective the business needs to protect any type of user data, especially if it's PII data. So making sure that as you are...
People don't like when their credit card information is lost or stolen?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
I must be in the minority on that.
Yeah. Yeah, no.
Sarcasm.
I haven't heard a story of someone happy or accepting in the fact that, maybe accepting because once it's gone, it's gone. But
certainly people stealing that information are happy. So.
Yeah, right.
But anyway.
Yeah, and then, optimizing the software to improve performance, scalability, and usability. So yeah, like we mentioned before, I mean, as you're releasing feature over feature over feature over feature, you're kind of like building on to the code base, building on, and you're hoping that this thing doesn't get bloated and heavy and fat and slow. And you just, as long as you got all the monitoring set up, you should be able to test all that, especially new features that are coming out before they hit production. You can run them through stress testing with actually connecting to production and running this feature. And, you can almost test before you even get there. But those are things you want to be monitoring for sure.
Yeah.
We talked about, obviously the 5-6 different stages, but then advantages when it comes to, software development lifecycle for businesses. So just making sure that it's aligned to the business objectives. That's extremely important. That it improves the software quality. I mean, if you're realizing over a period of time that the quality of your software is diminishing or not really getting any better, it's probably indicative that you're not following the software development lifecycle. You need to get back on the rails, on the train, right?
On the circle.
On the circle.
Yeah.
And that'll get your, or the cycle. Is it circle, cycle?
I think they're synonyms. They're the same thing pretty much.
Okay.
Cycle, circle.
And then greater efficiency and productivity. So we talked about how the software development lifecycle will, produces features that might cancel out redundancy in your software process, and then enhance collaboration and communication. That's another big one. So the software development lifecycle just breathes that, right? And as we get into the 2 agile methodologies that we'll talk about, Scrum and Kanban, both of those really bring out a lot of communication and collaboration when it comes to the software development lifecycle.
Yeah, I mean, these could be their own episodes almost. Like there's just so much that we could talk about with Agile.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is cool that this sounds like it's probably going to be like a real like less detailed, like smaller, like description of it, and then maybe we can go into more detail on some of these things.
Yeah.
In the future. Because I think I'd like to explore it more.
Yeah. Is this in the episode?
Yeah. Yeah, I was trying to make conversation about the episode, and like
I thought this was like a side note. Like, hey,
let's do this next.
Let's do this.
I'm sorry if that sounded like a side note. This is all going to be in the episode. I should, every time I start a conversation, this will be in the episode.
There you go. Count this in. Check.
Are we still recording?
I'm just joking.
I think we are.
We are a little over 40, so we could.
Wait, is this going to be in the episode?
Could be. If we want it to be. It doesn't have to be.
I hear the sound of our analytics dropping right now.
Boom, boom, boom. Hitting the ground.
Agile.
Yeah.
Let's talk.
Yep. So Agile, software development lifecycle isn't necessarily Agile, or it doesn't really fit under like the Agile methodology, like quote unquote. It isn't until you bring in the whole Scrum piece or the Kanban piece, or you just organically, are working underneath that nomenclature that you're making this thing a little bit more efficient.
Yeah.
But really it's about the Agile methodologies really group flexible, iterative, and incremental approaches to software development. They prioritize collaboration, adaptability, and customer feedback, which we kind of talked about that quite a bit already. Customer feedback in a way, like we mentioned before, if you're pushing out, 2 weeks and 2 weeks and 2 weeks, and you're able to like listen, you're able to get feedback back so that anything that's on your roadmap coming up behind it, you can change. You can be agile. You can be like, okay, no, we shouldn't put this button here. It shouldn't be a button. It should be an accordion.
Yeah.
Or it should be, a whole nother screen because our users are confused. So.
Yeah, and in customer feedback, isn't that not necessarily just like the end user customer, but maybe it's like the product owner, the stakeholder, the person that's like asking for this product to be developed for the company.
Right.
So like their feedback is part of this process. Correct. Almost. Yeah.
Absolutely. And focused on delivering small functional increments of the software, known as iterations, and they're in short time frames. So we mentioned before the 2-week sprints. We mentioned that.
Yeah.
Whether they're in sprints or just 2-week time periods, they're time bound or not. Sometimes not time bound, but more or less they are time bound. And this enables the teams to quickly respond to changing requirements faster because they're listening, because you're fostering the whole customer feedback, adaptability, and agility. Right?
Yeah. So you're not spending that month or two on on a feature that might become old news after a week or two. So like you get work done that is complete and fixed, and then you can move on to the next thing that is identified as needed to be fixed, instead of planning out an entire 6 months of this is what we'll do this week, that week, this week, that week. It's finish the week, figure out what you're going to do, or finish the scrum, figure out what you're going to do. Scrum. Sprint. Finish the sprints, figure out what we're going to do the next sprint, and then finish that sprint, figure out what you're going to do the next sprint.
Yep. So the benefits of going, agile is that flexible adaptability, faster time to market, improved collaboration. We mentioned that before. And then the two kind of big examples of agile are Scrum and Kanban. Which Scrum might hear about a lot more. We run more of a Scrum type process when it comes to large complex projects. I would say probably smaller the projects, one-off type projects that are kind of small or just maintenance related type stuff. We might follow more of a Kanban approach, where if we talk Kanban first, it's really just, you've got your to-do, you've got your, your in progress, and you got your done column.
Yeah.
Really the beauty of Trello, everyone remembers Trello from the day, but it was just like align your work into kind of what needs to get done, into kind of what you're working on, and then kind of what's done.
Yeah.
And of course you could, modify that a little bit and not have just 3, done, could become 2 different columns, ready for review and complete, or
ready for review, complete, published.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But then as we move on to Scrum, as we talk about Scrum, because Scrum's a little bit more involved, right? These are more time-bound, time-boxed 2-week sprints, where work is, if you got a feature that's going to take, 4 weeks to build, it's going to be broken up into 2 smaller chunks. While it might span over 2 different sprints, it depends on that. That's up to the product owner to choose or select. It's up to the Scrum Master to communicate that to the product owner. But yeah, it's the big difference between Kanban and Scrum is that the Scrum work is time boxed into sprints. And it's more of, deploying incremental type features, where Kanban is more or less, you could almost build a whole, a semi-complex website or something along that nature, just doing Kanban. But the hope is that you don't have too much work piled on to like one particular user, because they could have a giant to-do column and they might not know of that column what's more important, what needs to go now, what doesn't need to go now, and so forth and so on.
Yeah, there's certainly ability with things like user stories and like the point system that tell you like how much time something's going to take, what's more important than the other, what's part of this user story versus that user story. That you don't really get that type of like control and understanding in Kanban, because Kanban is just, it's almost like a moving task list from one status to another, like checkboxes and a status. And that's pretty much what you get with Kanban versus Agile.
Yep. And Sprint comes with,
or Scrum.
Scrum comes with ceremonies. They're known as ceremonies, kind of like events that happen like during the week. There's sprint planning that happens to plan the upcoming sprint, right? There's Scrum daily stand-ups that happen. Daily stand-ups are just quick 15-minute team check-in. What are you working on? What are you blocked? And then, potentially
what's next?
What's next? Sometimes teams might put, I'm trying to think of another thing teams might put into their stand-ups, but what you're blocked on, what you're working on, and what's next.
Yeah.
So those are daily. And then you have your sprint reviews. So typically, I don't know, the last day of the sprint, you'll get on a demo, you'll do a demo, or you'll do a review with the whole sprint team and the product owner, Scrum Master, and they'll review everyone together will review all the work that had been done, kind of like an overall status of the entire sprint. And then each owner of a user story, a developer, designer, creative, whatever, will do a demo of their work for the past, everything that they had completed.
Those are fun and very effective when they're done right. I mean, obviously, not everybody likes meetings all the time, but when you're in the meeting and the right stuff is being shown and like everybody's involved with it, it can be very, very cool to see all of the pieces come together, and also to see like what pieces might have been missed. Like you get to see, hey Jim, what about this thing, like this circumstance, or you might find something that was missed in a user story because suddenly you've seen it in real, and you're like, but what about this scenario, or what about that scenario? And then that's stuff that can be added on to the next sprint or whenever that work would be taken care of.
Right. And then one of the last ceremonies that happens is the retrospective. So after each sprint, the team gets together. Sometimes this might happen as the last 15 minutes of the sprint review or the demo that happens is what worked, what didn't work, what should we remove, right? And everyone kind of, typically it's, Jim did amazing with A, B, C, or
everyone's story points were wrong.
Wow, we story pointed this one feature to be an 8 and it was a 4.
Which, that's a good thing, but all of my 1s were actually 7s.
Yeah.
So
that was bad.
Yeah.
Or we didn't incorporate someone's vacation, and that put the team into a bind, right? So that's
we should specify story points are kind of like a relative measuring stick. So like seconds or minutes are very specific. You know exactly how long those are. Story points are more relative to things. So it's almost like saying, small, medium, large, or big, bigger, size, biggest, or something like that. So it's just like a general gauge of how much time or effort it's going to take to do it. And it's something that I'm absolutely terrible at doing. Last time we ran an Agile project, like all of mine were 3s all the time. I was just like, this is probably a 1, but to be safe, it's a 3. This is probably a 4, but I might be able to do it sooner. It's a 3.
Although, and to back you up, I've never seen a LinkedIn title that says I'm amazing at story pointing.
I'm going to make one today. I'm going to write an article. I'm amazing at storyboarding and other reasons that Matt should keep me hired forever.
All right. So that is the software development lifecycle, planning and analysis we call discovery, design, which is UI, UX, plus software architecture, design related, implementation, which is the coding. The deployment or launch, and then the maintenance
optimizations,
which is what we like to call optimizations.
Yep.
That is 5 different stages. Sometimes there's 6. Some companies might say there's 7 because they've split up design to be UI and then UX, whatever. But those are the 5 main-ish stages.
Yeah, all circles that run continuously until the end of time.
Till the end of time.
Or until the project is done. And then another one is started.
Or the stakeholders are happy.
Yeah, or that, which is not, that can happen?
That can happen.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah.
Never knew that to happen.
We had a stakeholder that was happy today.
Yeah, we did. You're right.
Yep.
Yeah.
We hear it so often that you don't even catch up on it.
Maybe it's just the assumption. It's like, wait, there are stakeholders that are not happy?
Yeah.
We're just so good. All of our stakeholders are always happy at all times. Never have
we that doesn't happen.
Never have we had a stakeholder that's not been happy.
That's funny.
Yeah. But that's cool. Right. That's a good episode. Good job.
Yeah. Yep. So follow us on social media. We are Moonello. See us on our website, themoonelloshow.com. Find us on YouTube.
Does it work at www.themoonelloshow.com? Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
We figured that out. We're smart.
Yep, we got it. We
Yeah.
looked it up. And our site is no longer password protected.
Right. The password was, so follow us on all the social media stuff too, because we post a lot of fun like little snippets and stuff like that. So cool. Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.